Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Late Night Happy Hour. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, getting you set. In a few minutes, we'll get to our conversation that we had today with Nate Duncan. Great NBA voice, Dunc'd on podcasts. You can subscribe to his network. It's a really good investment. Does the Hollinger and Duncan podcast. I think that's a Locked On podcast, Andy. I believe so.
Yeah, I believe it is actually.
Yeah, and also a host, does a really cool thing on NBA TV where he and Ty Lue, his podcast co-host, are sort of an alternate second screen for people watching the Monday night game on NBA TV, which on Monday actually is the Laker game. So if you're out of market, particularly, and you want to be able to access it that way, you can go through the NBA app, League Pass, and do it that way. So we'll talk to Nate Duncan here in a second. We want to mention, though, too, tomorrow night, we're going to have a really cool show and a very timely show. Jordan Rodriguez and Rich Hammond from The Athletic, the hosts, you know them, of the 11 Personnel podcast, are both going to be on with us tomorrow. And it's been a busy few days for the Rams. I can't imagine we'll have anything to talk about.
Well, I think it's going to take at least two people to parse through Sean McVay trying to talk around the question of whether or not Jared Goff is still the quarterback. Like, between Jordan, Rich, and the two of us, that's four people. It's almost enough to try to decode Sean McVay. Not quite enough, but almost enough, because my God, was that guy bending himself into a fucking pretzel trying to avoid just answering should be, on paper, a simple question.
Well, it's one of these things where the answer that Sean McVay wants, which is, I would rather have a different quarterback, may not be the one that he gets. And so, is it putting Jared Goff, if you missed it, on game day? He seemed to say that, Jared is our starting quarterback right now. And just in case there was any confusion at the sort of exit interview type things, he said everyone is subject to examination. Every starting position is up for grabs, and so on and so on. So as you tweeted out, Andy, Aaron Donald, you're on notice.
I mean, look, we're going to get into this tomorrow with Jordan and Rich, so I don't want to go too far into my thoughts on this. I just feel like there's a way to answer these type of questions that come across far less convoluted if you're not. I think the key is just say all the truth that you can, as opposed to trying to avoid saying every bit of truth possible.
Well,
and I think that's
how much truth do you think is available in this moment?
Actually, I think I'm okay. Tease for tomorrow. I actually think what you can say in terms of answering this fairly straightforward with a fair amount of truth, but not all of it in a way that doesn't sound like you are desperately trying to avoid answering the question, isn't nearly as complicated as Sean McVay made it out to be. But I will save what that is until tomorrow with Rich and Jordan. But I've given this some thought, and I think he missed this in a way that, if nothing else, sounds less convoluted than what he did.
Well, I mean, what it sounded like was that he didn't really like Jared Goff, but it's funny. We'll get into this tomorrow.
That, by the way, for what it is worth, that is a separate issue from the way I think you could answer the question. Also, too, it's important to remember these aren't blood oaths. Like, these guys really should be more conscious of.
What makes it unique is it's particularly in football, and particularly with Goff. It's not really. It's not a question that exists in a vacuum. The Rams really can't. Maybe they could trade him. They can't cut him. So, but the quarterback is just one of many things that are circulating around. Brandon Staley has moved across the proverbial hallway to the Chargers, and Raheem Morris, I guess, is the leading candidate to become the new defensive coordinator.
He's expected to become at this point, he is expected to become the DC.
And so, we'll have that to talk about. But I'm really fascinated to find out what that means for, guys like Jalen Ramsey had really talked up the candidacies of coaches on the staff, like Aubrey Pleasant, the defensive backs coach. Like, what does it mean for the rest of that staff if these, which is a good staff, if guys like that come in? John Johnson is believed to be the safety. John Johnson is believed to be a guy who could follow Staley to San Diego. And at the very least, even if he doesn't, the Rams might be able to play him. So all the stuff basically that I thought about the Rams last offseason going into this season in terms of turnover and how they could hurt the team and the depth and that they may be in trouble going forward. Now I'm going to be correct. I was off by a year, but now I'm going to be correct.
We've learned a lot. If nothing else in these last 4 years, the power of saying things enough until they eventually just become decided as true by a certain sect of people, if nothing else.
Well, I mean, this time I could be correct. Maybe this year they fixed it well enough, but next year I could be right. So
what matters is that you're eventually right, even if, by the way, you are eventually proved right after Sean McVay and all the current members of this team are gone. Like everybody's moved on.
And look, they could have won like 3 Super Bowls in the interim, but eventually they'll be bad. And I'll be like, I told you so.
Exactly.
And I didn't say they'd be bad. I said they'd be very average and ordinary and all that. And they were better this year than I thought they would be, no question. And lost to a team that was far superior. And I think is going to win again this week over the Tampas. But anyway, so we'll get into all of this stuff tomorrow night with Jordan Rodriguez. But in the meantime, Lakers are getting themselves set up for a very big road trip that begins on Thursday in Milwaukee. And we had a chance today to speak with Nate Duncan. And with that in mind, we will bring you that conversation. Podcast, Dunc'd on Prime, NBA Cast on Mondays. Thanks so much for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you. I don't think we've ever actually met.
Yeah, we were talking about that beforehand. If it was just in passing at Staples Center when I was down in LA at one point. But thanks for inviting me on the show, despite your the fact that we haven't actually met in person before.
Yeah, you got to do at least 3 to 4 years inside Staples Center, Nate, before I'll actually make eye contact or talk with you. It's just as one of the OGs, sort of, the people patrolling that area. This is the aesthetic and the culture that I've set, and I stand by it.
Just remember too, Nate, you're allowed to make eye contact right now with Andy because it's a Zoom call. But if you ever meet him in person, don't do that. It's not good. Not a good idea.
I mean, if you think about it, eye contact is kind of terrifying, isn't it? Like to just because like you look at the other person's eyes, and then you're like, are they looking at my eyes as well? Like, do I have are my eyes kind of bloodshot or something?
Well, you have to figure out what to do with it. I mean, that's the problem.
The hard part.
Making eye contact. It's if you know that you're truly just going to remain in passing, that's fine. But if there's going to be stoppage and then all of a sudden you have to act on that eye contact, it can be incredibly awkward. And sometimes it's just not worth making.
When do I look away? What am I allowed to do here?
Yeah. Well, I also I can't, it distracts me from thinking of something to say as well. If I'm, I mean, I'm pretty awkward too. I can barely even make eye contact with my wife, honestly. So.
Well, kudos to you for making it work then.
You two must be an adorable couple.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're
looking at each other
next to each other. We're sitting next to each other watching the TV, obviously. So why would we be making eye contact?
Honey, you sound married. I never make eye contact with my wife.
When I look over at you and specifically don't gaze into your eyes, the love that permeates, it's just wonderful.
That was a hell of a game last night, though, huh?
I was going to ask you. So you guys, you and Nate, do as much comprehensive work on NBA games as anybody. So before we get to last night's game, I was curious what you thought before last night's game exposed the Lakers as the frauds that they most surely are at this point in the season.
Yeah, well, obviously they had been the most consistent team in basketball so far. Part of that is because I think they've only had one COVID-related absence. That's obviously got to play in an evaluation of any team this year. I think Caruso is the only one who's missed time for them. So, and they obviously, with LeBron, with AD, they have a culture there. They are going to play hard defensively most of the time, and they have so much confidence. I think Steve Kerr was talking about this beforehand. They know how good their team is. They know how they want to play, and especially in this wacky season, that's going to be enough to take care of most teams most times, even without going full throttle. I think maybe that caught up with them a little bit in the second half last night in terms of their effort level, particularly in the third quarter. But overall, they've been exactly what you would have hoped, to being 11-4 and best net rating in the league, playing at a 65 win type of pace so far in terms of their point differential.
Yeah, a thing that Brian and I have talked about a lot over the course of the season, Nate, in terms of just that effort level that they're putting out or not putting out, depending on how you look at it, and by and large still winning games. When you look at contextually the reasons that they're doing it, the short layover between the finals and the regular season starting, LeBron's mileage, the toll that's been on AD's body, the collective age of this team, they do flip a switch, but they don't feel to me like a team that tries to flip the switch and, last night notwithstanding, continually gets bit in the ass for it, because they're not doing this because they're bored by the regular season the way we've seen with some defending champions in the past. I think they're doing this,
including, by the way, scores of Lakers teams.
Right. I think they are doing this because they recognize it's a necessity, and they're trying to do it in the most business-like way possible, like the most professional way you can go about mailing in a season. I think that's actually the way they're trying to do it.
Well, they have so much quality depth as well that LeBron in particular, I mean, he doesn't have to get into the post and go kill people every time. He's had one of the biggest declines in his on-ball usage in the NBA now that they have Schroeder and they're just playing him fewer minutes, and they've got Harrell. So they just have so many more offensive creators this year. So they don't have to try nearly as hard on offense as they did previously. And defensively, they just have enough good personnel. You've got new guys, new blood, I think really helps these championship teams as well. Someone like Gasol coming in, he wants to prove that he's still got it. And that starting lineup has been awesome for them. So Schroeder is playing for a contract. Montrezl Harrell is playing for a contract. So they got new guys who are coming in, particularly off the bench or in these supporting roles, who are able to keep the level of intensity up, even if you are only getting kind of 75% LeBron and AD at this point in the season.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because like Monday, LeBron actually legitimately by 19-5-5, 6 of 16 from the floor, missed the shot at the end. That was a legitimately subpar game from LeBron. He had the turnover, the travel, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but two travels. I've never seen that from him before, to travel twice driving a closeout. That was crazy.
I thought they were the right call. I mean, everybody was, sure. Lakers fans were annoyed because Draymond didn't get called for sliding his feet in the lane, but like that doesn't mean that LeBron didn't travel. He did. It was a travel. But
yeah, that Draymond play was weird.
Calls one day.
Yeah, the Draymond play was weird because maybe it could have been a foul on Harrell too, because he put his foot underneath Draymond's foot, and that's kind of what caused him to travel. So I think it ended up being a relatively fair result in the end on that one. A difficult play to call, but yeah. So and LeBron, the one thing I think I would say was encouraging though, I didn't think that their crunch time offense was bad. I think they just missed shots, whereas
in a row,
last year, and even in the playoffs, sometimes it was LeBron dribble for 20 seconds and then shoot that step back three going to his left. He really struggled shooting threes in the clutch last year in the regular season. So I thought their process was actually pretty good. They just couldn't knock down the open shots that were being generated in that fourth quarter.
We're 15 games in right now. The Lakers are the best team in the West as we talk right now. Brian and I have been talking lately about relative weaknesses, that all teams have, but specifically with the Lakers, because I feel like when you watch them play, most of the issues that they ever really have are self-induced, like turnovers being the biggest one. Like they are at their worst when they don't take care of the ball. And usually these are turnovers that are just lack of focus, laziness, trying to do way too much. But when they take care of the ball and they play, reasonably well, they often look unbeatable, or at least in terms of a series, unbeatable. When you've been watching them, what weaknesses, again, it can be relative, or things that you would be watching to try to develop over the course of the rest of the season? What stands out to you?
Well, I think the biggest thing to me is going to be, what is the rotation in the playoffs? Who can they really trust? For example, probably their best group in the playoffs last year was AD at center and Markieff Morris at the four. And Markieff Morris is playing like 6 minutes a game right now, and they've got Harrell. He's an awesome innings eater during the playoffs. During the regular season. Gasol is able to pass the ball, and they found this set with him in the corner where he's going to shoot it a little bit more from three, but he can maybe be an offensive liability, be a little slow defensively in the playoffs. Harrell really struggled defensively in the playoffs last year. I think he looks better now than last year, but that he can still be a liability there. You also have some of these guys like Caruso who may not shoot it that well. And so just finding the right combinations out there for Frank Vogel, even with all the capable players they have, but also having the egos that they have in the playoffs when you're going against, really, honestly, the Clippers and then maybe the Bucks or the Nets and maybe a full strength Heat team are the ones that I think could possibly give them some trouble. It's not, I'm a little worried, I guess I would say, that they might not be stress tested enough in the first 2 rounds. And then they get into the series against the Clippers and it takes them 4 games to figure out who can play and who can't. And maybe they punt a game or 2 early in the series because of that. That's actually the biggest thing that I would say. I don't know. I have a few others, but what do you guys think of that?
Well, no, but it's an interesting, it kind of leads into my next question that I was going to ask you is like, it's a good problem to have. Like, we're so much better than everybody that people may not be.
How are we going to adjust in the Western Conference Finals? Like, right, these are really good problems.
When we're finally tested, but the West has not looked, I think, quite as strong. There aren't a lot of crappy, just straight up awful teams. But, Utah's played pretty well, but Denver's been obviously a disappointment. The Rockets have completely fallen apart, depending on what you believe about that. Phoenix got off to a great start, slowed down a little bit, and they're obviously not, tested over the long term. Portland is beat up now beyond belief. What has gone wrong, I think, or in the West, or like, are there any of these teams that you expect to be the type of team that is playing at a high level that bumps into that upper echelon of teams that maybe could push the Lakers, push the Clippers, and surprise people by getting to a conference finals?
Well, I would obviously expect the Clippers and Lakers to be right there at the end. Obviously, we thought that was the case as well last year, and it didn't end up happening.
We've been promised this for like over a decade, Nate. Like some incarnation going back to 2006, where the Lakers and Clippers were supposed to get that hallway series, and the Lakers blew their 3-1 lead against Phoenix after the Clippers had gotten rid of Denver in the first round. So like this goes back a while. There was the Lob City era, the Kobe Powell era. This has never coalesced the way it was expected to. Is this going to be the year, Nate? Is this going to be the year we are finally getting what we are promised?
Well, I think so. As long as Tim Thomas isn't going to come hit a 3 against the Lakers to cause them to lose a 3-1 lead, I think it'll be okay. But yeah, it's I would think so. Obviously, injuries can change any of that.
Sure.
At a moment, LeBron and AD have been relatively durable. Kawhi and PG, but obviously, if any one of those 4 guys goes down, then that changes the complexion of things immensely. And there's a decent chance. If you think about it, even if only one of those guys each one of those guys has like a 5% chance of being injured. Well, there's 4 guys. It could happen. As far as the team that could crash the party, I think the Dallas Mavericks clearly, to me, has the most upside.
Okay, so you're still in on them because they've been, granted Porzingis has been hurt. They've had some guys in and out of the lineup with COVID stuff, but like you're still there on Dallas.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think Porzingis looks okay physically. He causes some real matchup problems for teams that want to play a traditional center. And Dallas, defensively, they are one of the best in the league right now. And I'm very interested to see they can throw a lineup out there with Josh Richardson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Maxi Kleba, play those guys around Porzingis and Luka, and I think you could get a pretty decent defensive group. But I certainly wouldn't favor them against either the Lakers or the Clippers. But I think in particular they match up a little bit better with the Clippers now, where you have more wing defense. They made that a priority in the offseason. And Luka's had a little bit of a rough start, but they haven't had anywhere close to their whole team so far. And I think particularly given some of the struggles of Denver and Portland and Utah, I just don't. Their perimeter defense is so suspect to me. I just don't think they can compete with the Lakers or the Clippers over the course of a full series. So I Dallas is the team to me that I think you really want to avoid if you're the Lakers or the Clippers. Not to say that they wouldn't be favored against them still.
I want to get to the Clippers in a second, but I'm curious what you think about Phoenix, not necessarily as a team that could shock the Lakers, but just about their overall potential for the season, because they were a team that I thought was a little bit tricky to figure out in the offseason, just because obviously adding Chris Paul matters a lot. But at the same time, you're talking about a team that has had like a decade's worth of chaos leading up to this season. Devin Booker is a really good player, but he's never proved himself as part of a team that's playing at a particularly good level. How good do you think they can actually be this season?
Well, I think a lot of it does depend on Booker. He's had a disappointing start to the season for me. I thought that when they went 8-0 in the bubble, and then just even in general last year when they had their good moments, he was a big part of why they were good. It was just when he was off the floor last year, it was a big part of their struggle.
Yeah, he's improved a lot in ways that I think some people may not even recognize, like as an overall playmaker. I mean, he's trying to become more than just a scorer.
Yeah, I think so. But the scoring actually hasn't been that good so far,
right,
this year. And he's also turning the ball over like crazy as well, which has been a big problem for them. And they've kind of gotten to the point that they were at, but with real good 3-point shooting from some of their supporting guys. Paul and Booker haven't really gotten going yet. Ayton hasn't gotten going yet either. I'm just trying to figure out which of their two units, on what side of the ball can they get to be elite. They've got Ayton. I think he's kind of, a slightly below average defensive center. And then their backup center is basically either Kaminsky or Šarić. And, you're going to be really small there. So being elite defensively, even though you have Mikal Bridges, who's a really underrated guy, that's kind of hard to see that happening. And so does it happen on offense? I think maybe that's more realistic. They've got Ayton's a good offensive center. Paul, Booker, if those guys can get going a little bit more with the 3-point shooting they have, maybe that's how they get to really being, a top 5 level of offense. And then I think they can be in the mix for, getting home court advantage in the West. But I still, particularly on the inside, if they go up against the Lakers, I think they're going to get dominated there.
It's interesting. Like all three, like the bubble stars, like the breakout bubble stars in the Western Conference, have all struggled a little bit. Mitchell's shooting like 42% from the floor. It's been a rough go early for Jamal Murray, and you just talked about Booker. It really reinforces how hard it is to genuinely make the leap, to not just do it at a moment, but do it at for an entire season. I mean, quite frankly, it's something that Paul George has kind of struggled and bumped up against, going from that level where maybe you're trying to put Mitchell and those guys now into that next level up, where he does it for 40 games but can't do it for 70 games. Like, what I'm saying? Like, how much of their struggles do you think is related to the pressure that comes with it, the expectations going up more than they probably should have? What's up with those guys?
Well, I think the biggest thing I would point to is just that this is a weird year. The bubble, everyone was really full go in the bubble. Everyone knew that this was going to be, a 2-month sprint at most, and there was a high intensity level. There was nothing to focus on except basketball. Now, I mean, for example, Devin Booker was 5 out of 21 last night, but his team hasn't played in a week. And so you just got all these weird absences and issues. Mitchell maybe hasn't faced that as much, but Murray, I would like to see him be a little bit more aggressive. So some of this was just, the great shot making that took place in the bubble. But I do think that Devin Booker played at a solidly all-star level last year. I think he's the one I would point to as the best of those three guys, the most consistent over his career. I think he's going to get it going. But certainly you can fall into the trap of, oh, this guy had an awesome playoffs. Now we're just going to assume that he's going to be great. And, all right, Jamal Murray shot 50% from 3. Like, that's not going to happen this year. So you do have to be a little bit careful about some of these breakout performances to where you want to see it happen year after year, and just automatically projecting that, all right, this guy's young, he was good in the playoffs last year, now he's going to be like this all the time. That could be a little aggressive sometimes.
Which team, if you had to pick one of these, you mentioned Dallas, particularly as they relate to the Clippers. If you had to pick the one team that matchup wise that isn't the Clippers that matches up well against the Lakers, who is it? Relatively well,
assuming there is one.
Yeah, assuming there is one. And I think, it's tough because the Lakers just have so much athleticism and size. And so that
Oddly,
just
it's
causes some of being
Sacramento.
wrong.
It's the Timberwolves.
Well, are we still, we're still limiting our talk to the West here at this point?
Yeah, and we're going to get to the East because the East is, I think, super fascinating now. All of a sudden, post Kyrie or post Harden trade with Kyrie and those guys together. But yeah, just looking at the West before we get to the finals.
Yeah, I do think that it's Dallas. The Lakers don't have that one awesome perimeter stopper that you would look at that's a great guy to throw onto Luka Doncic. I think LeBron can probably handle him in ISO, but they don't want him doing that all game. And you can always set a screen there as well. And the way Porzingis can space him out, if you put him at center, then it's going to be tough to play Gasol. It's going to be tough to play Montrezl Harrell. Probably Harrell. I mean, we saw that Harrell just got completely destroyed by Luka in pick and roll last year. And so, and then they can do a decent job of protecting the rim as well. They have some versatility defensively on the perimeter. I think, Kleba is a decent matchup for AD. No one's going to totally shut him down. And they have enough guys that LeBron isn't going to just be able to plow through them as easily. And so I think, and they could maybe, if Markieff Morris doesn't have it, and if Kyle Kuzma doesn't have it in the playoffs, and then you can't play Harrell or Gasol defensively, maybe that could put the Lakers into a little bit of difficulty. But again, I'm very curious to see what it looks like with Dallas trying to defend the Lakers.
All right, the Clippers are playing better than anyone in the West other than the Lakers. Before we get into, I want to talk about the culture of the Clippers because that's something they've been talking about. What stands out to you in terms of the way they're playing right now that's specific to under Ty Lue as opposed to how they've been doing it under Doc?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it can be instructive to go look at the last time that Ty Lue got hired and replaced a coach on a successful team, which was in Cleveland. And the adjustments that he made immediately were to go more offensively focused. Under David Blatt, for example, in Cleveland, they were playing Mozgov and Tristan Thompson together. They're a pretty good defensive team, but they weren't maximizing things on offense. And so Ty Lue said, hey, we're going to put great shooting around LeBron James and Kyrie Irving. That's going to be our focus. Those are our best groups. And maybe our defense isn't going to be as good. And that's exactly what's happened now with the Clippers as well. I mean, they are shooting the crap out of the ball at the moment. They're like 41% from three as a team. They're getting up a lot more three-pointers as well, but they've struggled a little bit defensively. And now when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are both on the floor, they've been better defensively. Right. That's been a big key. And their second unit, the players that they acquire kind of fit with Lue's philosophy. They got Lou Williams, they got Kennard. So they're not going to really be a fantastic defensive group on that second unit. But I think that's the biggest thing that sticks out to me is they're bombing it a little bit more. They're a little more high powered. Last year with Doc Rivers, they also had Harrell. They're getting to the line a ton. They're working into the mid range more ISO stuff. They're moving the ball more now. I think Nick Batum has really helped with that. So the ball movement and the 3-point shooting, and then just not quite being as good defensively, admittedly, with some different personnel. Is another thing that you point
to. To me, that's okay, especially in the regular season, because if you're a team with chemistry issues, offense is fun. Offense brings people together. You have the big moments. Guys hit 3-pointers. Everybody's getting their shots up and all these other things. And it's going to be hard to be a bad defensive team with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George fully engaged.
Patrick Beverly,
the Serge Ibaka. Like, these guys are too good to be bad defensively. Maybe you're 6 instead of 4 or whatever it might be. But when the playoffs come, I have every confidence that they'll be able to be good. But like, they need that team was short on joy by the end of the year. And it makes sense to me to add some of it. I said this in the summertime. I mean, Doc's got plenty of gravitas, and obviously he's an excellent and accomplished coach in the NBA. I think Ty Lue's a better coach. I mean, maybe he doesn't have quite the same voice as Doc, but it's not like he's a patsy, and he's way more progressive, I think, on both sides, than Doc is. I think they upgraded by going from Doc to Ty.
Yeah, I think so. Particularly when you look at it from an emotional perspective, they obviously just needed to turn the page from that previous era. You mentioned the chemistry issues, and it seems like Harrell and Lou Williams were and Beverly to some degree were the big ones who were having issues with Paul George last year. And so I do think Ty Lue, I think, has dealt better with the drama. Certainly he had plenty of that in Cleveland over the years. I mean, he's been the one coach who really has had the best relationship with Kyrie Irving over the years, it seems like. So I do think Doc is maybe a little bit better suited for your high power or your try hard underachiever type of teams, even going back to his Orlando days. And his Boston teams were more sort of self-starting teams with veterans who all wanted to come together and play together. And so, and I think there's plenty to be said for Doc being a little too rigid in the postseason, trying to stick with stuff that's not working that well. And they've had some massive collapses under him. And so I don't think that Lue is a better coach than Doc in every situation, but I think for this team, I am in agreement.
Well, I mean, Ty Lue, you go back to his playing days with Kobe and Shaq. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who learned what it takes to navigate big personalities on elite teams that don't get along. I mean, he has been on both sides of this, and I think can relate well to this from a bunch of different angles, which is why he could very well be a really good coach for the Clippers moving forward. I mean, it's funny with Doc, because he obviously is, he's a great voice, and I think in a lot of ways a really great leader, and he deserves a ton of credit for being the guy that helped the Clippers, shepherd through the Donald Sterling fiasco and move forward. And I think his presence there really mattered. But the reality is, he didn't really do anything for that team, where the team didn't move any further under him than they did Vinny Del Negro. And if you look at Vinny Del Negro's years when he had Blake Griffin and Chris Paul, and had a legitimate chance of being a good team, he basically did the exact same thing Doc did.
We learned that on @VinnyDelNegro on Twitter.
Yes. You visit VinnyDelNegro.com, a website I just made up.
His Instagram live feed is all about this.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not to say that Vinny Del Negro is a better coach than Doc or anything, but my point is just sometimes things run their course. And frankly, it seemed like that was going on with Philadelphia with Brett Brown. And, whether Doc ultimately ends up the coach that they need to take steps forward. Like, it seemed like they needed a new voice in that locker room. They needed a fresh set of eyes and vision. I mean, that happens sometimes. It's hard to keep one guy in place for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, certainly statistically, they didn't do any better under Doc. I think it felt different. I'd say the biggest thing that Doc did was empowering DeAndre Jordan to become an all-NBA level center, admittedly at a time when the center position was down. But, Vinny Del Negro was not even playing DeAndre Jordan at the end of games, right? Like, he was going with a washed up, 35-year-old Lamar Odom at the end of games for that Clippers team. So I do think that Doc increased their upside by really empowering Jordan to be a good player. So, and again, he certainly, I think, did a much better job than Vinny Del Negro.
Oh, he's a better coach. He's a better coach. I'm not trying to argue otherwise. My point is just for all of the celebration of Doc, and I don't even think it's undeserved. I'm just saying they didn't really progress in ways that were expected. I mean, they still never made the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, and obviously they had that collapse against Houston in 2016. And I think there is an element there. I mean, you remember years ago, Shaq called Stan Van Gundy a master of panic. And maybe there's a little bit of that element for Doc, that they just had so many collapses that he wasn't able to really turn around and be a steadying voice for. But I think he's perfect for Philly because he's got enough gravitas to where he can come in and say, all right, I've won a championship. I've coached all these stars, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Here's what you need to do to get to that level. These are young stars where he can help them to change because he has that kind of gravitas, which is, that's the only way the Sixers can continue to improve. And Embiid has been awesome so far.
Yeah. Are they legit?
Year.
Yeah. Are they legit? Because, Seth Curry is obviously missing time. The COVID protocols have really wrecked with their, messed with their roster. And they're still, I think on Monday, 9-5, something like that. Are they, because they're the Eastern Conference for me of Denver, where I've had real estate on Denver Island for years, and it finally paid off last year, and now it's devaluing. But is this the year that Philly actually does break through in ways that we've all kind of been waiting for the last couple?
No.
You want to think that over,
No,
Nate, or are you pretty confident there?
It's something I've thought about a lot.
We're not going to get anywhere, Nate, if you pussyfoot around these answers. I mean,
we need something definitive, please. A yes or a no. Oh, okay.
Well, now that could change if their roster changes. So I'll leave that open. But I think they're just not going to be good enough offensively, ultimately, and maybe not versatile enough defensively either. Because it's just, you saw it last year in the playoffs. You see it at the end of a lot of these games where Ben Simmons is not going to be able to create offense in the half court. Like he's averaging 12 points a game. It's just not like, that's not good enough. If he's going to be their second best player and their second best offensive player, he just has to do more than that. You can't. So if you're going to put the ball in the hands of Shake Milton or Tyrese Maxey at the end of games to run pick and roll because Ben Simmons can't do it, and then he has to just stand on the baseline and muck up your spacing, like that's just not that powerful. And Embiid is an unbelievable post player, but it's just too difficult to get him the ball and really have him dominate. It is very, very difficult to have a great offense built around a center, unless that center is Nikola Jokic, who can handle the ball out top and distribute to everyone. He's such a unique force, whereas Embiid, just even getting him the ball in the post in his preferred spots, it's really difficult, particularly when you're not worried about the guys who are passing it to him driving by you either and scoring. So I think ultimately I don't trust their offense, particularly at the end of games in the playoffs. And then Embiid, is he really able to get out on the floor and defend I think the other thing that it was obvious to me last year is you have to have defensive versatility. And once you get into the second round of the playoffs and beyond, you can't just play a drop coverage defensively. You got to be able to switch. You can throw in some zone. You got to be able to put two on the ball. You can't let the other team get too comfortable with what you're doing defensively. And while Embiid is a wonderful regular season defensive player protecting the rim, I'm not sure that he can play a different style.
Right.
Is Simmons? It's interesting when you were talking before about the limitations of Simmons when he's running an offense, just because he's not the type of scoring threat that you typically associate with, an all NBA player that Ben Simmons has been. Like, is he, I guess, the tipping point for the value of being able to generate offense as a force versus the value of being able to create your own? Because he's fifth in the league right now with 8 assists per game. And he's obviously really good at finding guys. He's always been an extremely good playmaker. So like, does he, I guess, just sort of embody that limit in terms of, the value of being able to create for others at a high end, but not being able to offset what you don't do for yourself?
Yeah. And I'm not sure that he's able to create for others. I mean, the assist totals are assist totals, but some of that is he's just dribbling up top and someone comes off a screen and they throw it to him for, he's not necessarily creating the opening. Some of that's in transition where he's obviously a massive force there. But to say in the half court, the possession breaks down, we're going to throw it to Ben Simmons and he can create a good shot for us, either for scoring himself or setting someone else up. I mean, he just doesn't have that in his toolbox. He can't shake guys off the dribble. He's not a great finisher at the rim, despite his physical tools. He doesn't want to get fouled. He obviously can't shoot outside of the immediate basket area. And so when you're just, the list of things that he can do to create a shot for your team is just very, very limited.
And so, like, all things being equal, setting aside the other aspects of the deal, draft picks, whatever might have been, would you'd have flipped him for Harden?
I think I would have, if it were just that straight up. I think once you had to throw in something else as well, then it might get a little bit more difficult, particularly because what else is out there for Ben Simmons is another question. Could they eventually get Bradley Beal, or is there some other star that they could make? And I think they want to at least see what it looks like with this group. But I mean, he was in the deal, and I think like they were going to give up more than that even, but obviously Tillman Fertitta was not particularly happy with that. And I think the Nets package ultimately ended up being better with all those unprotected picks anyway.
That's a really good point, actually. I've heard Kevin Artovitz make that on different hoop collectives. Like the idea that if Philly's going to move Ben Simmons, whether you think that's a good idea or not, that they would only do it for James Harden would be bad work by their front office. Like if you're going to put a player of Ben Simmons's talent level, and maybe I might have, but you know what?
Easy mistake to make. Very easy.
First of all, Ben Kingsley is a damn good actor, and I believe he's knighted. So if you're going to trade him, it needs to be for a really good package as well. Like you don't just move Ben Kingsley for the sake of doing it, just for some shiny new guy off in the corner. But like Ben Simmons he's got value around the league. So the idea that Philadelphia, if he really was being shopped, would box themselves into a corner of just Houston seemed kind of premature. I think you're raising a really good point.
Yeah, and obviously you want to be careful of just shopping your second best player to every team in the league. I think it's more that a certain opportunity becomes available, and then you might consider moving. But just
like the idea that they would, if they decided for whatever reason that Simmons and Embiid,
this is the first, only, and last opportunity to trade Ben,
and it's just not going to work. That they would automatically just be all in on Harden without really taking a look around, about his value around the rest of the league. It just wouldn't be good front office work.
Yeah, and also you're limiting your options as well. I think I disagree with them, but I think they believe there's a chance that pairing can work to go deep in the playoffs now with the team around them. That makes more sense. Let's not forget Ben Simmons wasn't even in the playoffs last year because he was hurt. That's conveniently something that's forgotten. And so you are sort of foreclosing the option that it could work, right? Because you could always move Ben Simmons after this year if you decide, hey, this pairing just doesn't work out. But it kind of gets back to just existentially, like, why are you owning the team? Why are you even in this business? Because with Simmons and Embiid together, you're going to probably win 50 games for the next 5 years, unless one of them gets hurt, which could happen. And you may not have that championship equity. Whereas Harden, he's probably got maybe a year or two left at this level. And then you either got to pay him $50 million a year going into his mid-30s, which will be a problem, or you lose him, or he's just not that good anymore. Probably maybe multiple of those things could end up being the case. And so you're kind of like, well, are we going to go all in for the next year and a half? And yeah, we have a greater chance of winning the championship in those 2 years, but then we're kind of done. Or are you going to say, we'll hold on to Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, and we'll still be a good team in this market, and maybe we could get lucky one year, or we could fill in some more pieces around them, or Tyrese Maxey turns into a star. So it's a difficult decision, and it gets back to, do you want to be a good team for a long time, or do you want to be maybe a great team for 2 years? That's kind of an ownership level decision almost.
By the way, Ben Kingsley still just 77 years young. I think he's got a lot of years ahead of him.
And let's be honest, dead ringer for Ben Simmons. Like if they walked into the room together, I'm not sure. I'd be like, Ben Kingsley.
Right. So I'm just saying, you don't trade Ben Simmons just on a whim, and you don't trade Ben Kingsley either.
I like how that just covered up my face completely, but you can still see you guys.
If you're sensitive about it, I mean, we can try to move you around. I think there are ways to do this. I mean, there we go. Now it's covering me. You feel better, Nate?
You're a technical wizard.
It was something of a rude treatment of the guest. It wasn't intentional, but
but when we asked Danny about this, he never told us you were a prima donna like that. So we guess we probably should have.
That's all right, man. The legendary Mazer Rackham can cover my face up anytime.
You mentioned Brooklyn earlier when we were kind of in Milwaukee. Obviously the Lakers going Thursday to play the Bucks. They've got Boston on this trip. They've got Philly. When you look at the teams that could compete with them, we went through the West. What about the East? Like, we've seen a little bit of Brooklyn, but not the three of those guys together. Milwaukee has obviously been very good so far this year, and Boston, I think, has played pretty well without Kemba Walker. So what over there do you think? First of all, how do you think that conference shakes out? And then what might that look like against the West?
I picked the Nets before the season, and part of that was based on the idea that they could make a trade to shore up their defense. And obviously the trade that was made
exactly what they did
was the exact opposite. And maybe the loss of Spencer Dinwiddie is something that pushed them in that direction as well. I mean, but realistically, what really pushed in that direction is that's what Kevin Durant wanted them to do. And he hilariously could be a free agent in a year and a half. And so Harden has looked good. He's getting back into shape now compared to where he was at the start of the year. He was kind of mailing it in by the end in Houston. And so I mean, they're going to be unstoppable offensively. I mean, it's basically probably them and the 16-17 Warriors as, the two most talented offensive teams of all time right now. But that 16-17 Warriors team was a top 5 defense as well. And watching them last night, you really wonder how they're going to come up with a way to stop other teams. And maybe what that way is we're just going to park DeAndre Jordan right under the basket the whole time. Just try and contest you enough at the rim. You can bomb threes on us if you want. You can get whatever you want from the mid-range in pick and roll, and we're just going to outscore you at the other end. They still have a few assets left, maybe some second rounders or the buyout market to shore up defensively a little bit. But I mean, they've got 4 of their 5 starters really are not defensive players at this point in their career. And so they're going to be a lot of fun to watch.
You consider KD to be decent on that? Because he before the injury, when he wanted to be, he could be an effective defensive player.
Yeah, I think it's at age 32, he's also lost some weight, which I think is really good for him compared to where he was. His conditioning looks a lot better, but he also is not going to be able to fight as hard inside or on the boards. I don't think you can really play him at center the way he is right now. And he hasn't provided the same level of rim protection that he was providing at times in Golden State. And he really struggles to get over a screen. We saw that at the end of the game last night where Chris Middleton was just walking into 15-foot pull-ups whenever he wanted to with KD trying to guard him. But you make a good point that he's going to really need to step up there. And maybe he can do enough at the end of games. I think he's at least always guarded LeBron James pretty well. Which is something that just with his length, he can cause LeBron a few problems. And so it's just going to be a question of getting enough there, I think, against this Nets team. And also, you would think that if you can put 2 of Kyrie, Harden, and Durant on the floor at all times during the playoffs, that they should be able to hurt teams when both units go to their benches. So I don't know. I'm fascinated to see how it's going to work out. I can't tell you that I necessarily have them as the favorites. I think you can argue maybe that given the way Kyrie was playing, if he was going to come back and keep playing this well, that maybe they aren't necessarily better this year. But I could easily be wrong on that. I mean, they could find this alchemy and be the best offense of all time and just good enough defensively, and that gets them to the finals.
Okay, speaking of that alchemy, what if anything do you think is going to be the most complicated part of getting Durant, Irving, and Harden on the same page offensively and making that cohesive?
I think Irving's role is probably going to be the most difficult one. And because Harden and KD, I think they fit together pretty well. And we saw that the other day. Harden
he certainly looked good in Milwaukee against Milwaukee. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one. And then I think getting Harden to be more of a threat off the ball, just as a spot up shooter, just even getting him to move into an open space when somebody else drives.
Have there ever been a player of his caliber that looks more just outwardly bored and double middle fingers when he is playing off the ball than Harden? I expect him to take out a magazine when he doesn't have the ball and just start that. I've never seen anybody look that disinterested when he doesn't have the ball.
Yeah, one of my favorite little media narratives, this was a common theme in the Harden's Houston years, was oh no, they actually want him standing at half court. That's good. We'll let everyone else play 4-on-4. It's no, actually, if he's standing at half court, you can help off of him. You're actually playing 4-on-5.
That's next level.
It's so nakedly naked outward disinterest when he does not have the ball.
Yeah. Well, and we saw that against the Lakers too, right? Sorry, what was that?
I was just saying he's going to be on his best behavior for at least a little while. So some of that stuff,
and then last night. Last night he looked disinterested when he didn't have the ball.
That just might be his face, though.
It's I
think it's his body too. It's not moving. The body is not moving at all.
It also gives you a better look at the body and what it looks at right now when it's not moving.
Yeah. He's getting back into shape a little bit more than he was to
He was
start.
in A shape.
Yeah.
He just
Yeah.
wasn't
So,
in B
but I
shape.
think, I mean, you guys saw it last year up close with the Lakers where they double team him, he gets off the ball, and then you can just run back into the play for having double teamed him, and he's not going to try and get it back. He's not going to try and move. You know, if you compare him, Steph Curry is one of the greatest off-ball players ever. But if you compare what he does to Steph Curry and like how the Lakers struggle to contain him at times, you know, just because he never stops moving. And James Harden is quite the opposite, of course.
Yeah, I imagine those mileage things that they get, you know, with the trackers that they have in the arenas. James Harden is below Steph Curry in the amount of running that they do during a game. That's below.
Correct.
He might be below Marc Gasol. Like, it's shocking how little that dude moves when he is not.
Yeah. Well, Big's got to run a lot more though. Big's usually you got to get from basket to basket on a lot of possessions, whereas Smalls, you know, running the floor, you can just go from 3-point line to 3-point line a lot of times. Yeah, they got to move more within the half court. But
all right, Nate Duncan, you know, from the Dunc'd On podcast, both the prime and the non behind the paywall. Explain how this works. Like, give us the whole rundown. And I also don't appreciate that Hollinger's pictures in front of yours on the Hollinger and Duncan podcast. But that's a separate.
Well, he's more famous and more important and a better analyst than I am.
And let's be honest, Hollinger is vain as shit. I mean, that guy is such a prima donna.
I did have to sell him on the show, and that was, you know, a key selling point. I will admit that.
Playing to his ego
and Duncan.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, I think we had a really stiff competition to see who could take the worst headshot, and whoever took the worst one got to be ahead. So that's how we decided that he was going to be the first guy on on there.
Yeah, Hollinger's is like, it's coming at you. Like, you will listen to my podcast.
Mine is terrible too. I mean, I've been like wanting to get a new one, and then the pandemic hit. I'm like, no, this is this one that my law firm took back when I was a lawyer 6 years ago. It's going to have to suffice.
John's looks like, though, if you don't listen to the show, he's going to cut you.
Like, one of the funniest things that I've found actually is, you know, I get into it with local fan bases on occasion when I don't love their young players enough. But I found that once I changed my Twitter avatar from looks like an asshole lawyer pick in a tie to just like the Dunc'd On logo, that my negative comments dropped by like 75%.
That's why we don't get a lot of that, because ours is Slava Medvedenko. And everybody, if there's one thing, even in these fractured times, that we can all agree on, Nate, it's Slava Medvedenko. He brings us all together. He's the great unifier.
So the one thing actually I should probably tell you guys about the most, because it applies to Lakers fans, is Danny Lue, my partner, and I do this NBA cast with NBA League Pass. We actually are like official commentators now every Monday, and our next game is going to be on February 1st for Hawks Lakers. So if you are a Lakers fan who is watching on League Pass, you're not in LA, check out our commentary on that Hawks Lakers game on February 1st, 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. That's probably the number one thing that I can plug that's relevant to this show.
Very good. Cool. And then obviously the Dunc'd On podcast, Hollinger and Duncan, all that. Nate Duncan, we really appreciate you doing this. You do like 743 of these shows a day. You are an incredibly busy guy, and so we appreciate you making some time for us.
Yeah, well, the marginal cost of doing a 744th isn't that high, so I'm glad to do it.
Sure.
It's still nice. We're still going to say thank you.
I'm offended it took this long, Nate. Yeah. You got this much free time. I mean, the fuck, man? Like, too good for us? Appreciate it, man. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
Mute my microphone. All right. So that was Nate Duncan. Great podcasts. Just really good, as you could tell here. Great, really just a great NBA mind, knows the league. Check out the one with Hollinger. It's a really good podcast. I thought it'd be kind of fun to go back and look at this. One of the criticisms that kind of came up at the beginning of the
really quick, just because it's just what we do around here. Sector Cruz says on the chat, Slava was my spirit animal.
Yes,
ours too, Sector.
That's right.
Ours as well. That is our Twitter avatar. One Slava Medvedenko dunking on. I'm not sure who that is.
Looks like is that It's a Sacramento.
It
no,
is
it's
a Sacramento.
Milwaukee, no, it's not. It's a Milwaukee Buck.
Oh yeah, it's a Buck, and I believe that's Dan Gadzarich running,
running behind him. No, he's not dunking on.
No. I don't know who he. Oh, you know who I think that might be? I think I need to look it up. That might be Tony Kukoc.
Oh, nice get, Slava.
I'm gonna look it up to see if Tony Kukoc ever played on the Bucks. But
All
if so, I think that's Kukoc.
All right, so that was fun. It is. Sector Cruz says Kukoc. Yes, it is, and so does Ojoy so I think that's Joe I.
Okay.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Everybody agrees it's Kukoc.
Yeah, Gadzarich and Kukoc were teammates in the early 2000s together. So there you have it.
Bucks of Milwaukee. And it also should be noted that Slava Medvedenko, our cousin Rob, had a stretch where he looked a lot like Slava Medvedenko.
Yeah,
much shorter, but there you go. If there's a criticism of the Lakers, and this is why I think we talked about it last night on the podcast, which everybody can download, Land of Lakers podcast. We'd encourage everybody to do that. This road trip, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, a Cleveland team that at the very least has been very good defensively when everybody's been available, and hopefully
Larry Nance Jr. is having a terrific season.
Yeah, they're
He's
just
playing really well.
Yeah, that team isn't nearly as bad when they're intact as everybody thought. Obviously, Milwaukee on Thursday, I mentioned Philly, mentioned Boston. If there's a criticism, Andy, of the Lakers to this point, it's that they haven't played anyone, and the teams that they have played haven't really, they haven't done that well. I mean, they lost to the Clippers on opening night. They lost to Portland. They lost to, they lost to Golden State. And then who's the other team they lost to? They lost 4 times.
San Antonio?
Yeah, it was a San Antonio game. And, those are the over 500 teams that they've played, more or less. I do remember having this conversation last year, too.
Yes.
And it felt more worrisome last year than it did. Last year, it felt like, let's talk about this. This is a legitimate thing to talk about. I am less concerned about their record against these teams now than I was last year.
Well, I remember, Brian, the specific point where this narrative came to a head, and that was heading into that weekend where they played the Clippers and the Bucks in the same weekend.
Yep.
That was going to be the big measuring stick, like 72 hours for a Laker team that still had some doubters and still had some people that didn't really believe in the quality of what we've seen, that really they'd been racking up wins against really bad teams. And guess what they did? They beat the Bucks and the Clippers that weekend pretty convincingly.
Right. And it's important to remember, too, I think that, your opinion about these things should change as new evidence comes in. At the time, the evidence was maybe this is a problem. Maybe they have some relative weaknesses, particularly against teams like the Clippers and things like that could be exploited and all that. Now, the evidence shows that they are better than all of these teams.
I mean, look, here's the thing, too. In this, I guess, short of this small of a sample size, we're only 15 games
in.
In a season this weird and disjointed, it's actually really hard to know who the hell's good and who isn't.
I thought that was a great point that Nate made. I mean, one of the reasons the Lakers are 11-4 is they've had one guy missing. It's why I think the Sixers start is impressive, because that roster's been, really, really messed with. Boston's has been really messed with. And so, the Lakers have basically been intact to be able to do this. Now, they're not beating up on, COVID thin teams necessarily.
Look, they're 4-4 against teams 500 and above, which is not as good as you want it to be. But at the same time, they're 7-0 against teams below 500. And as you and I have talked about a lot over the years, that's where you build up your record. That is where championship teams build up their record. They beat the crap out of really bad teams, and they don't let those win opportunities slip away. It doesn't mean that you need to be that you don't need to be really good, I should say, against the best teams in the league as well. I'm just saying, the idea of, they've only been racking up a lot of wins against sub 500 teams. That's what they're supposed to do.
And it's also, that's who they've played. And so,
Yeah.
and San Antonio, who is better than people expected. That was, three games within, a very tight period. If that's a 7-game, but I'm just saying, if that's a 7-game series, if you play it out like that, the Lakers win that in 5.
Well, but I mean, I guess taking this further, one of their 4 losses is against Golden State last night. Does anybody think from watching that game that Golden State is better than them? Like, the answer is no. Golden State may not make the playoffs.
Right.
Like, they're not as good as the Lakers. Like, the Lakers took their foot off the gas pretty early in that game and ran into a bad.
Put it back, and I say put it back on.
Right, but they ran
as they've done, and then just played a bad fourth quarter.
Right, they ran into a bad combination of they weren't able to rev it up with as much consistency as dominance as they're used to. Golden State, to their credit, played their asses off that entire game, and they started hitting shots. Yeah. And the Lakers, very uncharacteristically, started struggling down the stretch of a game. I don't expect this to be indicative of a larger problem.
And it's not something that they do in the playoffs. The other thing that I thought was interesting about that was we asked him, and you always have to, we'll tweet stuff out during the show, and so people are aware of it and all that stuff, and like to give people an idea of things that are being said. And like when you talk about weaknesses for the Lakers, it's all relative, and it's important to keep that in mind. That we ask, this is not Nate Duncan or anyone else with the haterade. Like, we asked him the question. That idea that because the West isn't as strong top to bottom, that you could get to the Western Conference Finals and not quite be as battle tested as you would want to be, it's a good problem to have. Do you think it's actually something that could be problematic? If he was trying to come up with stuff. I mean,
sure, no,
we're asking the question.
Absolutely. It's not like Nate was spending a lot of time trying to convince us that the Lakers aren't nearly as good as their record.
Paper tight.
To that question, it would be something I would be more concerned about if the Lakers hadn't already won a championship with a lot of these same guys. You know what I mean? Like they are battle tested. They've won a championship, and last season they also played under more extraordinary circumstances than any other team in the league. When you take into account what happened in China and Kobe's death and all these different things that specifically happened with the Lakers, on top of the pandemic, on top of the season being stopped, then being one of 2 teams that was in the bubble longer than everybody else, that team already went through a lot. So they are already, by definition, battle tested.
Yeah, I made the mistake of looking through, like, not necessarily our Twitter, but other Twitters. The Darius Soriano at Forum Blue and Gold, and like the Silver Screen and Roll guys. People really did freak out. And like, it's just there's. To me, it's just like this team is fun. It's a fun team to watch. It's an enjoyable moment where you can kind of wake up, like many of us are hoping to, over the next week, learn to wake up in the morning with less just like kind of lean into that. Like the Lakers, they're going to lose every 6th game, every 7th game. There's going to be a night where they lose to, an Eastern Conference team. They might lose to the Nets when they play them, and it makes you worry that maybe they won't. They're going to be fine. I'm not saying they're going to win a title, but this is an excellent team that's going to do very well, and they have a chance to win. The Clippers might beat them, maybe an Eastern Conference team beat them, but they're not just going to like crap out of the playoffs because they do something really stupid. Just enjoy it. Like, this fun team to watch. Get out and enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely.
Stay in and enjoy it.
Yes, that can't not be said enough. Stay in. Gone this far. Let's do this damn thing right and get it over with.
It is serious. I'm not sure if we'll wrap up here on something a little more lighthearted. But if you get a chance, take a look at George Sedano, our friend from ESPN, our former colleague. Really serious stuff in his timeline, talking about a friend of his who is very near death with COVID. Reminder that this is serious stuff. But anyway, let's end things on a happier note. It is our friend Nathan Mark's birthday.
Oh yes, Nathan Mark, long time viewer of the Late Night Happy Hour, subscriber of the Land of Lakers podcast.
Probably subscribes to our YouTube channel, which all of you, I really would be helpful if you did.
Yeah, big time participant on our Twitter timeline at Can Brothers. It's his birthday, so 1, 2, 3, join us, everybody.
Everybody's singing. You need to be singing at your house.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Speed it up.
Happy birthday, dear the Nathan Mark. Happy birthday to you.
Woohoo!
There you go.
Now that
We can put out a poll. Who sang it better?
it's hard. It's actually harder to sing in unison over this than you might expect.
Yeah, even like a split-second delay can be really, really awful.
Although probably not as hard as we made it.
Nope.
All right. So tomorrow night's gonna be a great show. If you want some angst, if you're a person who needs, a sports fan with angst, tomorrow night's going to be your night because the Rams have plenty of ways they can generate angst for you. And we will discuss them all with Jordan Rodriguez, show favorite, and Rich Hammond, both of them from The Athletic. The cast of 11 personnel. They do fantastic work on that podcast and on the site, covering the Rams. Great people, great insight coming tomorrow. There will also probably be talk about birds. We will make sure to leave time for that. But if you have angst about a local team, tomorrow is the night for you. Thursday, we're still kind of getting in pen. A guy we think would be a great guest. Hopefully it works for this week. If it doesn't, we'll bump it to next week, maybe or whatever. Friday, Andy Lue and Sam Esfandiari, the great basketball voices from up in the Bay Area. And all right, we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Donkey.